Good morning. Hello, everyone. I am Shiva Nagesh, representing Palit and Co. We welcome you all for our first online session. And the topic which we will be discussing today is GST implications on remuneration paid to directors. At the outset, we hope all our viewers are observing social distancing. This pandemic has wreaked havoc, causing over 126,000 deaths across the globe. We pray for the well-being of everybody and especially those who are on the front line in this unique war. Continuing with our today's topic, GST implications on remuneration paid to directors. A director, as a part of the board of directors, is responsible for undertaking several key functions in any company. He may be a managing, executive, non-executive, whole-time, non-whole-time nominee, or independent director. Director is entitled to remuneration in various forms like sitting fee, commission, salary, etc. Depending on the type, a director may or may not be involved in day-to-day operations. The remuneration and tax treatment adopted thereof, therefore, depends largely on the role of a director which he plays and the nature of relationship he shares with the company. In a recent case of Claycraft India Private Limited, the Authority for Advanced Ruling, Rajasthan, has held that the salary paid to directors will be exigible to GST under reverse charge mechanism. The issue has understandably caused a furore in the industry. However, before we proceed to critically analyze the ruling, let us first take note of the facts, submissions, and key observations in the ruling. Now over to my colleague Pulkit Singhal.
Hello everyone, myself Pulkit Singhal, part of Palit & Co. So here, Claycraft India Private Limited was incorporated in financial year 1988 and 89 under the erstwhile Companies Act 1956. Its board comprised of 6 directors who, apart from discharging their duties as directors, engage in managerial work as head of distinct aspects such as head of procurement, head of quality checks, head of dispatches, head of finance and accounts, in lieu of a fixed and regular remuneration. For this purpose, the assessee has executed a contract of employment with the directors. The assessee was remitting commission to the directors in addition to the fixed and regular remuneration. Treating this fixed and regular remuneration as salary, tax was deducted at source thereon under Section 192 of the Income Tax Act 1961, whereas TDS on commission was deducted under Section 194J. Provident fund was also being deducted from the salary component. So, accordingly, the assessee discharged GST on commission under reverse charge, but he did not pay GST on the salary component of the amount paid to the directors. The assessee, having regard to the ruling passed by the Authority of Advanced Ruling, Karnataka, in the case of Alcon Consulting Engineers India Private Limited, had approached the Authority for Advanced Ruling on the issue. The assessee was relying upon the employment agreement, articles of association, the treatment being meted to salary component, and various judgments. Submitted that fixed and regular remuneration was the nature of salary, and hence no GST was payable thereon. However, on the contrary, the Advanced Ruling Authority observed that first, both the commission and fixed and regular remuneration form consideration payable by the company in lieu of the work undertaken by these persons in their capacity as director. Second, the directors are not employees of the company. So even if it termed the fixed and regular remuneration is termed as salary, it will not be covered under entry number 1 of Schedule 3 in absence of employer-employee relationship. And third, the services of director have been notified by the central government in notification number 13, central text dated 28 June 2017, under section 9(3) of the CGST Act 2017. Accordingly, the GST liability on consideration remunerative directors is required to be discharged by the company under reverse charge mechanism.
Thank you, Pulit, for taking us through the ruling. Let us now take note of the relevant provisions under GST law. Under the GST law, Section 9 of CGST Act forms the charging provision. Section 7, subsection 1 defines the expression supply to cover all forms of supply. Subsection 2 specifically excludes the activities specified in Schedule 3 from the scope of supply. Entry 1 to Schedule 3 covers services by an employee to the employer in the course of or in relation to employment. Now, we must also refer to Section 9, Subsection 3 of the CGST Act. The provision authorizes the central government to notify supplies on which GST is payable by the recipient under reverse charge. The central government has issued notification number 13/2017 to provide for services exigible to GST under reverse charge. Entry 6 therein covers services rendered by a director to a company or body corporate. So the recipient company is liable to discharge on the consideration paid to directors in lieu of their services on reverse charge basis. What follows is that salary paid to an employee in lieu of his services in the course of employment will not be exigible to GST. It would neither qualify as supplier of goods nor of services. The services of a director to a company, if and when exigible to GST, will be chargeable on reverse charge basis. The question that crosses one's mind are whether a director is an employee, whether a director can work in two capacities. To answer these questions, we will now move to my colleague Lalitendra Gulani.
Thank you, Shiva. My name is Lalitendra Gulani. I'm part of Palit & Co. Companies are statutory fictions, meaning unlike individuals, they do not have a physical corporeal existence. The powers and limitations of a company are governed by Companies Act, read with Memorandum and Articles of Association. Under Section 149 of the Companies Act, each company is required to have a board of directors. The powers of any company are exercised through the board, and the board's powers are coterminous with that of the company. If an analogy that can be adopted with respect to this concept of board of directors, it will be that of a body and soul. While the company forms the body, the board of directors forms the soul of the company. The term director is defined in Section 2 Clause 34 of the Companies Act as any person appointed to the board of directors. Now, there can be various types of directors: managing director, whole-time or non-whole-time director, executive or non-executive director, nominee or independent director. The term managing director is defined in Section 2 Clause 54 of the Companies Act as a director who is entrusted with substantial powers of management of the affairs of the company. The term whole-time director is defined in Section 2 Clause 94 as a director who is in whole-time employment of the company. The term executive director is defined in Rule 2 of the company's specifications of definitions, details, rules 2014 as a whole-time director. So what follows from the above, from these definitions is that a whole-time director or an executive director is in full-time employment of the company and undertakes various activities apart from the activities entrusted upon him as a member of the board. Similarly, managing director refers to somebody who enjoys managerial powers. He may or may not be a full-time director, even though practically he often is. This is unlike independent directors or non-executive directors who are entrusted only with tasks as member of the board. Now, the company law per se does not define the nature of relationship shared by a company and its director. The term employment that has been used in the definition of full-time director will not automatically result in an employer-employee relationship. The term employment as used in the Companies Act refers to full-time engagement and is not an indication of employer-employee relationship. Similarly, a managing director does not automatically become an employee. A managing director, crudely speaking, acts in two capacities: first as a director and second as a manager. The term manager is defined in Section 2 Clause 53 as an individual who manages the whole or substantially the whole of the affairs of the company. It specifically includes a director, but whether or not under a contract of. Now, the important phrase is contract of service. The concept of contract of service refers to a contract which evinces employer-employee relationship. Herein, the service recipient enjoys the status of employer. He has right to supervise the provision of services, control the manner in which activities will be undertaken by the employee, and hence when the term whether or not when the use of the phrase whether or not under a contract of service in the definition of term manager implies whether or not the manager is an employee of the company. So what follows from this is that uh, the managing director need not necessarily be an employee of the company. A whole-time director need not necessarily be an employee of the company. Now, this concept of contract of service is in sharp contrast to the concept of contract for service, which evinces only a service provider and a recipient relation. Now, to give a practical example of it, of contract for service, for example, if I go to an advocate for an opinion on a complex issue, then I can't control the advocate's opinion, his manner of preparation of opinion, drafting of opinion, his work timing. In case of employer-employee relationship or a contract of service, the employer, that is a service recipient, exercises that very right to control and supervise the services of employee. Now, we all are aware of the concept of vicarious liability. For acts of employees, the employer is vicariously liable. So that is also a relevant point of distinction. In the case of Pyarelal Adishwar Lal versus CIT, the Supreme Court held that in case of employer-employee relationship, there are certain unique rights which are enjoyed by the parties. First, employer's right to select. Second, employee's right to payment of wages. Third, employer's right to control and supervise the activities that are undertaken by the employee. Fourth, employer's right to reject. Now, coming back to the concept of directors, as a member of the board, a director cannot be said to be an employee because the board is the company. The board forms the soul of the company. Now, when we conceive the concept of employer-employee relationship, we require two separate persons. Now, as a member of the board, a director cannot be said to be an employee of the company who is acting under the supervision of the board because he is part of the board. A company is a fiction. The board as a whole represents the corporeal part of it necessary for undertaking any action. However, for managerial activities undertaken by a whole-time director, apart from his capacity as a member of the board, the company and director are free to forge a relationship of employer-employee or service provider and service receiver. In the case of Ram Prasad versus CIT, the three-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India held that director may have a dual capacity. He may be a director as well as an employee or agent depending upon the nature of his work and the terms of employment. The term employment therein, as the Supreme Court held that the term employment as used in the Companies Act is facile enough to cover both the scenarios. And here the term agent refers to director undertaking activities as a service provider on behalf of the company. So yes, in this case it was held that a director can also be an employee. Interestingly, in the case of Claycraft, the authority only referred to the preliminary aspect of company law that a director does not form an employee of the company. It failed to take account of these points with respect to the concept and role of various types of directors and other nuances of the company law.
Right, Lalitendra. It seems that the authority could not develop a wholesome understanding of fundamental aspects of company law. But the next question is how to determine whether the director is an employee or service provider. The topic whether the relationship between a director and the company in respect of the managerial activities undertaken is that of contract of service, employer-employee, or of contract for service, service provider, service recipient, has been discussed in detail under the income tax law, which will be discussed by my colleague Pulkit.
Thank you, Shiva. Section 14 of the Income Tax Act provides for classification of income under 5 distinct heads. First, salary, then income from house property, then income from profit and gains from business or profession, capital gains, and income from other sources, depending upon the nature of income. So, the salary paid by an employer to an employee is taxable in the hands of employee as salary and exigible to TDS under Section 192. In umpteen number of decisions, it had been held that classification of income as salary and applicable TDS provision in Section 192 is dependent on presence of employer-employee relationship. In other cases, TDS under Section 194J will be applicable. As Lalitendra mentioned, in case of employer-employee relationship, the employer exercises control and supervision over the activities undertaken by an employee in the company. An employee is entitled to wages, an employer becomes vicariously liable for the acts of an employee. In case of directors, the applicability of above provisions has been examined in umpteen number of cases. The courts have determined the presence of these factors on the basis of articles of association, contracts executed between company and directors, nature of work undertaken. For example, in the case of Ram Prasad versus CIT, the Supreme Court has observed that in terms of articles of association, the managing director was required to work under the control and supervision of board of directors. On this basis, it was held that company exercised control and supervision over the activities of managing director, and there was an employer-employee relationship. Accordingly, the remuneration paid to him was in the nature of salary. Interestingly, in the case of Claycraft, the fixed and regular remuneration paid to directors was treated as salary in the return of income furnished by directors and subjected to TDS in Section 192 of the Income Tax Act 1961. This treatment was made owing to the presence of employer-employee relationship. Despite this, the advance ruling ruled that salary paid to directors is exigible to GST under reverse charge mechanism.
Very right, Pulkit. In fact, one of submissions advanced by Claycraft is that they were deducting PF, Provident Fund, for which they also relied upon judgment in case of Regional Director ESI versus Sarathi Lines Private Limited. The instant issue of indirect tax on salary paid to directors is not novel. The provisions under GST regime are very much aligned to the provisions under erstwhile service tax regime. Under service tax law, activities undertaken by an employee for employer in the course of employment were excluded from the definition of service. Under notification number 30/2012, the services provided by a director were covered under reverse charge. During that time also, the industry did not levy service tax on salary, but discharged the same on sitting fee and commission paid to directors under reverse charge mechanism. However, the department slapped a number of companies with service tax demands on salary paid to the directors. For this, I wish to refer to two important case laws. Firstly, in the case of Allied Blenders and Distillers Private Limited, it was held that where assessee company paid remuneration to its director to its whole-time directors for managing day-to-day affairs of the company and made necessary deductions on account of Provident Fund, paid professional tax, deducted TDS under Section 192, and declared these directors to all statutory authorities as employees of the company, remuneration paid to them was nothing but salary. And accordingly, the assessee was not required to discharge service tax on such remuneration paid to the directors. Similarly, in the case of NRB Industrial Bearings Private Limited, the person was appointed as a managing director and salary was paid to him as per memorandum and articles of association. Forms filed before ROC had mentioned salary and perquisites paid to the managing director. Accordingly, it was held that service tax not leviable on salary was salary paid to the managing director.
Rightly said. In fact, Ministry of Corporate Affairs issued a circular on applicability of service tax on commission payable to directors of a company. Therein, it clarified that service tax is levied on remuneration paid to non-whole-time directors. Then one should possibly presume that no service tax is on remuneration paid to whole-time director.
One interesting point is that once we conclude that salary paid to directors is covered under Schedule 3, the Authority for Advanced Rulings viewpoint in the ruling that salary should be exigible to GST cannot be saved even by the applicability of the concept of composite supply. Composite supply is defined in section 2 clause 30 as a supply comprising of 2 or more taxable supply. Taxable supply is defined in section 2 clause 108 as supplies which are leviable to GST. Now, supplies in schedule 3 are not leviable to GST. So, in the present scenario, while one component is that of supply of services by a director to company in the nature of employee in lieu of salary which is non-taxable, the other is that of director as a member of the board which is taxable. Instead of two taxable supplies, there is a mix of taxable and non-taxable supply. Hence, beyond the scope of definition of composite supply.
So Lalit, what do you feel should be in the case in respect of commission or profits in lieu of salary?
Pulkit, many SSCs are facing dilemma with respect to remuneration which is paid as percentage of profits of revenue. One very interesting point is that the term salary is not defined in the GST enactment. However, Section 16 of the Income Tax Act defines the expression to include profits in lieu of or in addition to the salary. In the case of Ram Prasad, even the remuneration paid to managing director as a percentage of company's profits was held to be salary. Hence, one may very well argue that even such remuneration, which is paid as percentage of the profits of the company, will be outside the scope of GST being in the nature of salary. The determinative factor lies in the nature of relationship that is shared by the director and the company, and the consideration that is paid in lieu of the services rendered by him, by the director in that relationship, and not the manner of determination of revenue or remuneration. In case of a company having a revenue of say 1000 rupees, we can say that a director will be entitled to a fixed remuneration of rupees 50 or 5% of the company's turnover. In both the scenarios, the employer-employee relationship should be determined on the basis of control and supervision test, regardless of the manner of determination of remuneration.
Right, Lalit. I think from the above discussion, we can now conclude that the ruling passed in case of Claycraft is incorrect, and the salary paid to a director in lieu of managerial tasks undertaken as an employee will not be exigible to GST. However, one important point that we need to note here is that there are over 17 lakh companies registered in India. Nearly 90% of the companies are private limited. Over 1,600 companies are listed on National Stock Exchange. A survey revealed that in the financial year 2015-2016, companies listed on National Stock Exchange paid a remuneration of over 3,200 crores to their managing directors and executive directors. Given the nature of issue involved, this ruling has far-reaching consequences. One can expect the department will litigate the issue and slap companies with notices based on this ruling in Claycraft. I now hand over the proceedings to my colleague Pulkit for the course of action which the companies may adopt in future on to tackle this issue.
Thank you, Shiva. So one easy option is that a company can decide to pay tax and avail the input tax credit of same. The transaction in that sense will be in revenue neutral position, but this would ultimately impact the cash flow of the company, and further, taxpayers engaged in making exempt supplies will bear the burden, as they will not be entitled to benefit of the input tax credit. Also, a regular taxpayer might face an issue with respect to available input tax credit on account of the time limitation prescribed under section 16(4) of the CGST 2017. Even though an untested interpretation reveals that time limitation is not applicable on reverse charge supplies, or it should be applied from the date of payment, there is likelihood that that too will be contested by the department in future. In case a taxpayer desires to litigate, he must make sure that position under GST law is aligned with at least income tax law.
Right, then thank you, Pulkit and Lalitendra, for your valuable views. We will now proceed to end the webinar. We apologize for the absence of question answer portion this time. We'll surely have it next time. We have taken note of the queries and will proceed to reply by email. In case of any clarifications, you may send email to contact@palitco.com. And last but not least, thank you all for taking out your valuable time and joining us in this webinar. Thank you. Have a good day.